Hi, welcome back to Last Enclosure. I say welcome back because this is actually a two-parter. This is the second part of my ongoing conversation with my co-host about AI. In the last episode, the first inaugural episode of The Last Enclosure, Nick and I talked about AI as well as what it is and how it is progressing. In this episode, we're going to continue that conversation and also talk about ways in which AI resembles many other technologies that have come before and what that trajectory might look like. So let's jump right in.
The LLMs, derived from the transformers, they're doing an amazing singular function, but it's being sold to everybody by Sam Altman. Elon Musk is taking an interesting set of technologies in the, autonomous vehicle systems, but even there, it takes all of these remote operators to work. Even in the case of Waymo, we're sitting here close to San Francisco, they had to map and model the entire city of San Francisco just to make those cars work. So this is trying to foolproof the basement so that Grandpa Shelby can live in it, right?
Right.
So this digitally dementiac, aging um, uh, intelligence system we're now trying to smooth out all the edges so it can have free operational reign over the world.
Right. And I'll be the first to tell you that much to the disappointment of anti-AI people, large language models aren't useless. Now, they are wasteful, right?
Mhm.
We are spending more and more money to basically, there is a thesis early on by some computer science people that as you scale these models, they'll get more performant, more capable. And that has not proven true. It seems like scaling will give you a little bit, but like if you are, you know, it's sort of the question is the juice worth the squeeze? For Sam Altman, it is because, it's not his
Because
money.
he's highly invested in it, yeah, and
Well,
also
but it's also not his money.
it's also not his money, yeah, he's
Right. So
both. He's both
he's
ends.
happy to tell you scale is all you need
Yeah.
as long as you keep giving him money. Right.
Is it also the case, this is a leading question, but tackle it as you would, that all of the low-hanging fruit has kind of been gotten in terms of training these models? It's in the massive body of data that from the internet, from the digital record more broadly that we've shoved into these models to train them on, that had amazing scaling effects early on in terms of their efficacies. Like, oh look, we made them better. Has it reached that plateau then? And we're still being promised, even though we're plateaued, we're still being promised it can get smarter, better, faster, longer, right?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the debate in the field, and I can't speak to that, but from my understanding, yeah, I mean, you got people like Gary Marcus is probably one of the core figureheads who's been saying
Yeah.
this since 2022. But interestingly enough, and I've mentioned this multiple times in my writing on my blog, there's
Misaligned markets.
I'm not trying to plug. I'm just trying to give you information.
Steer you towards the info.
Yeah. I think the person's name is Leon Jones. So they are one of the authors on the Transformers paper.
The
Okay.
original one.
Well, the original one, the
Okay.
one that kind of set off this frenzy, not in 2023, but in 2018, the
Yeah.
architecture that underlies the language models.
Back in the innocent days of the Garden of Eden at Google.
So Jones is like, I'm putting words in it, but sure, I'm tired of Transformers. He said this, but like, I'm tired of hearing about Transformers. So they run a tech company now.
Why did he say they were tired of Transformers?
They run a tech company now that's not, part of the current AI hype cycle.
Sure.
They are interested in doing, um, you know, good research, right? Because they clearly were doing academic style research at Google, right? And so it is now difficult to get funding, for things that are not like chatbots, because that's the current frenzy. All the money is going into chatbots, and more specifically, actually, all the money is going to data centers, right? Data centers that are not being built, actually. So the data centers
the VC has now been monopolized because it always chases the trends to this, as opposed to going to more productive angles, and that's why they're tired of Transformers.
So one of the interesting things is that Sam Altman commoditizes this too early, because what happens when you commoditize something is money moves away from R&D and it moves towards, use cases, functions,
use case,
stuff.
right.
It sort of locks you into
that
resources
branch of the development
have.
tree.
Yeah, that branch of the tech tree that you're currently on, right? And so if it was true that let's just imagine there is a world where Grandpa Shelby actually does have full control and is competent, you know, if assuming that world is real, well, when you commoditize language models, you can no longer work on the architectural side of that. So now, as
You
time is
can't
going,
repair and improve the airplane while you are flying it
yeah.
in that sense, yeah.
So, yeah, now we're, like, locked into this architecture.
Yeah,
A lot of the gains are now coming from sort of like with driverless cars, it's sort of like in the tooling and the workflowing and the processing, right? So, like, to give you an example of how we help Grandpa Shelby, there's a technique called RAG. It's a retrieval augmented generation, and so you have, like, a standalone database or a data source that a language model can pull from, and the RAG basically becomes the memory for Grandpa Shelby, because Grandpa Shelby, remember, cannot learn anything.
so the rag is the sticky notes
The rag is
that
sticky
he's
notes that he's writing
that he's writing
on
on,
so
yeah.
he can remember what he's doing, right? And so Jones, was saying, "Look, I want money for architecture that can actually learn. I want money for architecture that can actually, do something on its own."
Mhm,
There's no money for that because all the money is going into, uh, um, not even you would think, and I've said this several times in my blog writing, you would think that investors would have gotten wise and said, "Oh, okay, we're locked into this language model architecture built on transformers that can't learn. They're like Grandpa Shelby.
right,
Let's invest heavily in the tooling around Grandpa Shelby, like the rags and all these other kind of systems, so that we can have the most performant version of this architecture." No, all the money's going to data centers
yeah.
for Grandpa Shelby as he is now, with the hope that everything else will catch up one day to make Grandpa Shelby even more powerful, right?
The problem is, and again, to beat this metaphor to death, Grandpa Shelby can't improve. He is a digital, uh, entity who is, unchangeable, aging, not cannot get better in a sense, and that is a sort of a
Yeah.
marker that we're laying down.
But what can get better, and this is sort of what the
Are the
actual
sticky notes.
yeah, are the sticky
Ish,
notes,
yeah,
right?
yes, sir.
And so to build those sticky notes, we are actually reconfiguring the way we do labor
Mhm,
so that we can, satisfy those requirements, right? So what AI is, right? We were sold this vision of I call it capital as labor, right? This idea that for 1 unit of capital, for 1 unit of Grandpa Shelby, you can replace 1 human being, right? That is what we're being sold, and even to this late date of, the bubble, right? Because I think everyone's sort of agreeing it's a bubble. You even have,
the AI bubble is all around us now. It's growing, it's expanding, yeah.
right, and then the story
It has
switched.
not burst as of the publication of this podcast.
Right, it has not burst. The story we've been given is, oh, all good technologies are bubbles actually, and the fact is, it's a bubble actually is a good sign that it will be transformative one day. But, you know, like the bubble, or sorry, the premise that we're being sold even to this late date is that eventually this will be capital as labor. It will be able to sub 1 human for 1 machine, and it will be so transformative, so beautiful,
Mhm.
right? And what is happening instead is we are firing people based off that premise. It's not true, by the way. And then we are
We, the hosts of this podcast, are not firing people. The capitalists and,
I think they know that,
entrepreneurial
right?
class, right.
Are
We are
you
not advocating for the
you're
firing of
secretly a
people.
business owner.
Right, no, no, no,
Okay,
exactly. I would hope that, upon the successful, skyrocketing of my own startup, that we don't, ever have to actually fire people. One, because it's a little inhuman, and also, that's a form of brain drain, and that's, again, that's what these figures, your Sam Altmans and your Elon Musks, that's what they're trying to promote, is this idea that, um, to other capitalists, they're saying, "Hey, we can finally eliminate the need for all of these pesky workers, at least a large percentage of them, maybe a
yeah.
majority of them." And that's been the goal, obviously, since the Powell memo forward. Sure, we can get into that
You
later.
could actually just the goal of capitalism writ large
Well, like, from the very
forever.
beginning, yeah.
Right.
Let's say back
Yeah.
to the original sin of capitalism itself. So this is then the newest iteration of that. Um, and that would be okay as long as they were being truthful that this was in fact the fourth industrial revolution, but it is not, because it's just Grandpa Shelby.
So I think the smart money, and it is sort of the point I was trying to make more broadly
Yeah,
is I think there are people now who know that that isn't true, right? But they are persisting in the myth
yeah,
because it gives them more bargaining power. But on top of that, what is happening and what may be happening is we are causing So this is not a industrial revolution. It's a industrial reorganization.
It's a realignment.
Right.
One of
And
those
so the idea
realignments.
is, we've spent all this time trying to highlight that AI systems, and I'm now using the term deliberately as an umbrella.
Mhm.
Many of them require humans in the loop, not just for safety, but because the humans are providing the functionality more broadly,
To
right?
make it
There's somebody
frictionless.
building the RAG databases and
Yeah.
managing the way that the model retrieves information. There's somebody who's training the models, you know, in order to steer them towards, better behavior. There's somebody, who is doing all this labor to make what looks like a pristine kind of engine, self-perpetuating engine, do all this work, right? And so,
There are the workers who are brought in to smooth out the basement just so that Grandpa Shelby can shuffle around safely in the basement.
right. And so there is a story in which, well, if they can't make capital as labor true, they can subsume labor into capital, right? So your job now is no
When we
longer.
say subsume also here academically, that is reassert the social hierarchy, the working hierarchy so that the worker never then makes any gains.
So I mean this metaphorically, and I mean this literally, right? It's
Yes.
it's 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 literal in what you're saying, obviously. But it's also literal in the second sense that, like, your job now is to become the scaffolding that will let Grandpa Shelby move through the world,
Mhm.
right? So you will still have a job, right? You're not going away, right?
But
But
it's gonna
you,
be a worse job,
yeah,
like the workers in the Philippines who have to operate these remote vehicles and, you know.
right, right, right. Now, to some extent, there'll still be labor, high paying white collar jobs where maybe you get the final version of Grandpa Shelby with all this scaffolding,
Mhm.
and you get to keep your kind of like, um, high paying knowledge worker job, right? But for many people in other fields, your job's either cleaning up after Grandpa Shelby, right? It produces some output and you have to edit it, or you're gonna be part of the scaffolding that helps Grandpa Shelby navigate the world, right? And so, yeah, and that way it is disciplining labor, but it's also, fueling this dream, and it really is a dream of these people like Kurzweil, et cetera, because they wanna live forever, right? And this idea, you know, I mentioned John von Neumann, and it goes back even further. There's the Russian cosmist who, like, literally believed that technology would create paradise on Earth,
Mhm.
allowing for the implementation of, the promise of the Bible, basically, right? I think, Nikolai Fedor, I can't say his name, but there's one of the first, like, you can call him the father of transhumanism, and he is a Christian who is like, "Oh, technology will allow people to be brought back to life, we will have life after death. We will have all these things the Bible promises because of these amazing technologies that will develop in the future." This is
Nikolai
him writing in
who began as, like, a Russian Orthodox
right,
figure himself, yeah.
right. This is like in the early 1900s, right? But
Yeah.
saying you can trace
This
this.
debate is very old.
It's not just it's literally like this animus, this impulse of trying to salvage
Yeah,
this vision of a rapturous technology that will actually, radically transform humanity, right?
yeah,
It is true that technology transforms humanity. It's true that technology is good or can be good, right? But there is this vision of technology that is self-actualizing. It will be a point where technology is just so powerful,
mhm.
so transformative that it takes a life of its own, and it just gives us what we deserve, what we need, what we want, right? And in order for these, some capitalists, some, if you want to use Marxian terms, the bourgeois who are consuming AI, if they let themselves kind of slip into the fantasy, the future is quote unquote here in the form of something that takes the shape of a helpful assistant that can do all these things, right?
Right, and we look at and we've already said, "Hey, we don't care if Sam Altman believes it or Elon Musk believes it. They can't stop selling it because ultimately this is the Seinfeldian principle of it's not a lie if you believe it." And so they can they can sell us these things which are generally demonstrably untrue because they are the spirit has taken them. And so this whole, like I said, this whole history of turn of the century utopianists on forward to today, how is this impacting us? And I want to insert here a very specific example because I think this is something that, again, our audience will probably very likely have heard about. So, a great achievement in here in California, in the Bay Area, of the last political cycle was there is now a brokered labor agreement that's been enshrined in law. Gavin Newsom signed it. The legislature approved it. That enshrines the rights of gig workers like Uber drivers, etc. And this is great news. At a long last, a conflict between capital and labor has been resolved. This is great. Why was it so long in coming? And the answer to that is, these gig workers are being treated as gig workers when really they're just employees. They deserve more compensation, more rights, right? And they finally have them under law. But for many, many years, the people in charge of Uber, the people in charge of these capitalists, these figures that we're critiquing, were using the idea of autonomous vehicles are just around the corner. They're just a few years away. And if they were just being foolish about these promises, that'd be one thing. But they were using it to intimidate the Uber drivers and this cohort of workers
Right.
from like being so scared for their jobs that they voted against the original prop
Right.
here in California that would have given them actual rights. So again, they were scared, they were terrified by this AI is coming for you, so you better get the benefits you can right now and vote against your own interests. So that's a concrete modern example about how this old form of techno-utopianism was being used and weaponized in our own lifetime, in our own political discourse, to literally take the benefits away from people and have them vote against their own interests. So these things are cropping up all the time, and identifying them and saying, "Oh, I recognize that pattern. This is utopianism being sold or terrifying a group of people or a class of people." And that's what we're trying to sit here and point out and saying, it's happening all around us. It's a little bit of a conspiracy. It's a little bit of a trend. It's mostly just a fact. And I think being informed about that and seeing it for what it is can empower people, can reassure people, our listeners or the public more broadly, and saying we can redirect this for our own good in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. I mean, one thing I wanna clarify too, and this is not necessarily a disclaimer, but,
Please.
the technology, you know, I don't say it's young, neural nets are even older, right? But we don't know the shape this technology will take in the future. It's possible there's another architecture around the corner that's maybe a bit more of what they promised, but the point that you're making more broadly, that we have a say in this process, is definitely true. I mean, you and I from our training at Cal, we encountered
Cal Berkeley, go Bears.
Go Bears. Yeah, so we encountered, through our degree, lots of visions of political economy, something that stuck with me that I keep coming back to, and not necessarily because it's accurate, but I think it's a metaphor that I think is useful, is Karl Polanyi's double movement, right?
Oh, yes.
Um, Thank you, Professor Kadir. So, um, double movement basically is this idea that, you know, and because this is something that's been true for most of capitalism's history, is you have sort of these movements and counter movements, right? You have basically capitalists create an opening move where they basically try to produce or present forward a new technology or a new way of codifying things, right? Think back to the land enclosures in Britain, after the 14th century,
The
15th
theft
century,
of the commons, of course. Yeah.
right? The erosion of the commons, right? You have these developments in which capitalists are saying, hey, we want things to be this way, right? In a way that favors them, right? And then you have sort of the public at large kind of responding saying, no, we have to embed this technology, this process, this idea, these laws in our common social understanding because we live in a society.
Right.
uh,
But we do be in a society, though.
we do be in a society though, right? So
Yeah.
you have, for example, I mean, I think about, because bringing this up because we're sold technology as this thing that sort of like just is neutral. It inherently solves problems. It's just all you have to do is get out of its way, and it just becomes good. And you think about something like a factory. I mean, factories in their conception were just sort of like a house of horrors, right? You have children getting their hands mangled, right? Factory fires happening all the time, people being underpaid, working 16-hour days, right? All of these abuses that we kind of take for granted are gone,
Are you
right?
talking about factories in a turn of century America or just factories now in the developing world?
No, well,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
story is always the same, right?
Right, right. History
Right,
repeats.
like
Yeah.
the technology by itself is not necessarily good or evil. It depends on the context, right? Technologies are this sort of this coupling of an innovation, right? The actual implementation or sorry, technologies are this coupling of an innovation or the actual thing doing a solution, right? And the social implementation of that solution, right?
Hmm.
And so that coupling could be disastrous, right? You could have, a technology we're fighting over AI right now, right? A transformer is a neutral architecture that helps, a computer have attention over a certain set of data, right?
It's morally neutral.
Right. But then you deploy that as a surveillance tool, and then you've got a surveillance apparatus, right? That is not neutral, right? And in the same token, right? This double
Look
movement.
for our upcoming episode on surveillance capitalism and national security coming up this season.
I think it's all you because I am not familiar with the surveillance applications of this technology specifically.
Yeah.
I'm obviously familiar with surveillance, but
Well, it'll be, connecting back to this debate, like, OpenAI is now saying Mythos is too powerful. It's going to hack the world.
Anthropic.
Sorry, Anthropic. Yes.
Dario Amodei is also an interesting figure. We can get into him
Yeah,
a little
exactly.
later, but
Well, no. So you were talking about
double movement, right?
double movement. So the enclosure was an attempt, the enclosure movement, to take. They weren't even called public lands because back then there was no real distinction.
It was just the
It
land.
was just the land
The
was there
land
for the
was for
use
the use of people,
for the
right? So
people who were
people who
locals.
were
Yeah.
living on the land, whose livelihoods depended on farming the land.
Or stalking deer in the forest, or
Right, exactly,
you can
right.
think of Robin Hood, but this is much later. Yeah, yeah.
Because when you think about it, land is natural, and the way I think England codified it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that okay, the king through his divine right owns the land, but he's just giving it to the people, right? But
Yes.
in actuality, I mean, I think it was sort of I don't know if this is the way it worked out, but tangentially, it's just like recognition that there's a lot of land, and naturally, some of it is just available, right?
Yeah, so the landed gentry who did have certain rights under the existing, laws were just had those rights expanded. They literally just took over more and more land granted by the Leviathan, by
Parliament,
the king,
right?
and that enclosure then literally and physically edged out the serfs and the regular people who had been relying on this, space,
For
for
generations,
generations
yeah.
to subsist and live.
And you see a fighting back. First, you have the unlanded. Literally go. You put this fence here.
Mhm.
I don't respect your property rights. This is always a common land.
Yeah,
They break down. They break down fences. Break down walls. Right, because it's like this is our land. Right.
yeah.
Then the fight starts playing out in the courts. Right.
An amazing scene, I'm gonna plug, not that it needs it, the film Cromwell, about Oliver Cromwell, where you literally see agents of the king come in and start putting up actual fences, like enclosing the land literally, and the peasants rising up, and Cromwell coming in to save them from basically getting the lash. Um, so that moment then taken forward a few years, a few decades, um, uh, results in, well, we can't use this land for our own purposes, so the poor people have to move into the cities, which then feeds the emerging the first industrial revolution, the
Right.
very first one, and coming into the very first factories.
Yep.
So this very long process, this double movement, is what we're seeing now, and the back and forth, the wave and the counter wave, the undercurrent, is the emergence of political movements in the city saying, "Hey, yeah, we do." People and kids being injured on these factories floors and being mangled and being without compensation. This has to stop, right? So obviously, this is a large historical process being looked at but those dynamics are present today. We are living in our own movement of our own moment of the double movement.
Yeah. It's something I kind of appreciate, and this is sort of me extending Polanyi's framework beyond where it was intended. Is that you can kind of see a miniature double movement play out with most technologies, right?
Polanyi, who sort of immemorialized the term double movement
Right.
itself, right?
Yeah. So, one example of this is like you think about, let's take a technology like the car, right? So, you got your first kind of like Model T's hitting the road. There are no rules of the road. And so for some part of the car's history, it's just sort of this toy for the people that can afford it, and is a menace to everyone else, right? You got drunk drivers, you've got people hitting pedestrians,
Even worse, wealthy drunk drivers.
right? And so in order for the car to even be useful to society as a whole, and then, kind of barring its second order effects through climate change, whatever,
Sure. So let's
which
ignore that. Yeah.
it's
For
its
now.
own story actually,
Right.
because
No, it
there is
probably is.
actually a
Yeah.
double movement of fuels that involves,
Oh man, we can't do fuels yet. We'll
we
get
won't
there. We'll
talk
get
about that,
coming up this
but you know
season.
who is,
Yeah, you know who. Mr. Midgley is entering the chat at some point.
so
But the first
the
generation of vehicles, yeah.
first generation vehicles, right? It's not until you start, having the kind of rules of the road as alongside the efficiencies of the car, obviously, that you have the technology becoming useful enough to diffuse the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we were living in that wild, wild west of just drunk drivers, you know, y- treating cars like Playmobiles, I mean, I think the technology would not be as useful or as ubiquitous as it is today, right? You have this co-movement of people saying, "Hey, we need roads, we need designated places to drive. We need these things in place that allow you to have the infrastructure that then lets the thing become actually useful to everybody, as opposed to just a toy for like 5 people," right?
Right.
So
The rough roads, which were fine for horses and buggies, very slow but workable. The roads have to be smoothed out. Like the basement needs to be smoothed out for the sake of this emerging thing, and that is the vehicular revolution, the automotive revolution here in the United States, and then it spreads to the world and everywhere else. And of course, it does benefit on the double side of the double movement. It does benefit eventually consumers and workers and laborers, but that's only in reaction to this initial thing, this initial tide.
right.
Yeah,
So someone, usually a capitalist, does an action that's sort of not embedded in the way that the society functions, or the culture functions,
yeah.
right? People react to that, right? Make factories safer, give us better pay, right? And then you have in the synthesis of that dialectic, in a synthesis of those two competing
In a
forces,
Hegelian sense,
right?
yes.
And the synthesis is what you get, as a result of that, right? So now, because of people petitioning for roads and safer streets, we've got cars that are, less lethal than they used to be in
Right.
some sense.
We need to
Uh,
remember that streetlights were a revolutionary suggestion um,
right,
by a African American innovators. So let's,
right,
again, coming from the class of people who were being hurt and damaged, they came up with the solutions to make this emerging technology actually work in implementation,
right.
to make it smoother, better, more humane. Um, so let's take this example, carry it forward to today. Autonomous vehicles. They've mapped San Francisco. There's large swaths of New Mexico and Arizona that are being modified for the sake and where these vehicles are being trained. And seemingly, nothing has really come to the benefit of the rest of us yet. We have not seen the countervailing action that would improve it and implement it for all of us. It
Yeah,
is to the benefit right now um, of the owners of Uber, the owners of Lyft, Elon Musk at Tesla, all of these figures, the capitalists themselves. They are pushing this on us. They're doing the modern enclosure, and we have yet to sort of assert our rights again. I would cite the recent legislation in California that is a model for the rest of the country. That's my political plug for the day. And there are, so that's good news. There are ways of asserting our rights and our rights as consumers and citizens, but it takes organization. It takes time.
yeah.
You know,
It's interesting you mentioned enclosure. Because I talk about this again in my blog, specifically my post about the AI bubble.
misaligned markets.
uh, I said it before. I guess if you're listening this deep in, yeah, I guess. Well, first, thank you for listening. But I was trying to spare you from having to hear me.
No, they're here for the long ride.
Okay.
They got in the back. They're coming to
So
the end.
it's interesting you mentioned Enclosure in my AI bubble post called "What to Expect When You're Expecting an AI Bubble." Great title, I know, very
Fantastic.
cute.
Yeah.
Um, I talk about this notion that okay, so transformers, Google, you could argue foolishly gave away the transformer in kind of keeping with the tradition of diffused social knowledge, right?
Mhm.
AI has always been a field that's been open, very academic, very kind of traditionally academic, right?
Well, but as a side note, uh, without taking you off your point, the recognition of the engineers and managers at Google was, this is a limited use item. It's an interesting, fascinating, even powerful thing. But it took a figure like a Sam Altman to say, I'm going to let this out of the box and also try to make billions of dollars doing it. The people at Google maybe rightfully said it's not ready for prime time. I mean,
It's
isn't that a
it's
fair assessment?
it's possible. I've heard people mention that. I mean, Google, at least
Can't we
tacitly.
say that in hindsight because of what we now know about its application?
I don't know enough about the internals of Google to actually know. I mean, I've heard some people suggest that,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so let's pose this as a question instead of a statement.
Mm.
Perhaps they were being wise in not releasing it
So
entirely.
there is some sense where that might be true,
Yeah.
right? Because they had done a research on applications with chat. Like a lot of what OpenAI was doing was sort of like standard practice across the industry. Even we call ChatGPT the AI model, right? But those letters GPT stand for something.
Of
A generative pre-trained transformer,
Yeah.
right? So like that technique of making a transformer into a
Not GPT, general purpose technology, which is a separate vocabulary term.
we'll bring that up later.
You will all be quizzed later.
Um,
Actually, I will just be quizzed.
I promise I won't go too hard on you. um, so that GPT was a technique, a technology, a way of building transformers that was known to everyone. That's why, in fact, actually, when OpenAI tried to patent the term GPT, people were scoffing.
Like as a trademark,
Yes,
even?
they tried to trademark GPT.
Wow.
Right.
I actually didn't know that.
People were scoffing at the idea because it's like, well, this is a technique that is open to the entire field. Everyone's known about this, right?
It's
So
literally open source
yeah,
itself. Yeah.
well, because the transformer is open source, right? So
Right.
anything built on a transformer
Yeah.
is open source. So if you reverse engineer what they are doing,
To this day, at the time of publication, a transformer is still an open source piece of
I don't.
technology.
It's not revocable because it's like that's what it's a publication. The paper
Yeah.
on how to make a transformer architecture is known.
It can't be enclosed by
Right.
the capitalists at this point.
But what kind of back to my broader point
Yeah.
is this is an attempt at enclosure, right? So
Mhm.
transformer itself is a neutral architecture. It has a lot of implications, a lot of applications, right? So to give you an example, so there is a GPT called, I believe it's called Evo. It is it's a GPT trained on genetic sequences, right? I think it was released by Stanford, and I want to say NVIDIA. They worked on this thing, and basically the idea is to predict genomic sequences in order to do genetic research, right?
This is
So
a positive use case then.
yeah, it's a positive use case.
It has
I don't know
demonstrable
what
benefit.
the medical implications are. It mainly seems to be a science biological research tool.
Yeah.
Maybe the downstream implications are for medicine, right? But here's a GPT that does not require billions of gallons of water to run. It doesn't require more and more data. It is a scoped domain. And part of the reason why we keep building these data centers, or we are financing these data centers, I should say, many of them are not getting built. We are financing these data centers on the hope that scale is all you need, and the more scale we give this behemoth, the chat GPT of the world, not the general GPTs, but the chat GPT of the world, more data and more scale, it will become the living God that will do everything, as we've been talking about throughout this entire episode.
Right.
Right.
That God being the AGI eventually.
Right. Or the super intelligence,
Yeah.
right, that will either save us or destroy us.
The automated general intelligence.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, But you have within the transformer architecture these scoped narrow domains, or even with chatbots too. You have scoped narrow domains where you can measure the performance of the task, you can design tooling around that task specifically, and you can allocate resources effectively because you're not trying to build something that will do everything, right? If you're building something that will do everything, you have to give it everything in order for it to do all those things, right? So
But that hasn't stopped any of these guys from promising it will do everything.
right. So the reason why they're doing this, and sort of my broader point, it is interesting you brought up enclosure, is because the chat GPTs of the world are an attempt to enclose the transformer architecture, right? So transformers are transformers arguably are a general purpose technology, a GPT, if you will,
Mhm.
separate from, again, the generative pre-trained transformer, right? So in technology literature, there's this term called a general purpose technology. It's a technology that has a very broad and diffuse purpose, right? So the internet is one such GPT. You could consider railroads a GPT, right? They allow for network and communication and transportation in ways that were not possible before, and that underlie most of our society's existing infrastructure and progress, right? So there's an argument that
We
just
don't have to tear up the train tracks just to put different things on a train car.
yeah,
Like, that is the general
yeah.
nature of it. Yeah.
So there's an argument that the transformer itself is a GPT because you can create a transformer for any purpose.
Mhm.
And what these guys are doing when they are kind of crying slash praising their alien god, right? Is that they are trying to get us to look away from the transformer architecture as it is, right? Sort of the underlying architecture, and kind of like sublimate all of those abilities and techniques into a chatbot, right? So we, in order to interface with transformers now going forward, we will have to interact with their chatbot as opposed to
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
working with the underlying architecture, right? Right. So if they, for example, can, because a lot of people praise, for example, Whisper, which is OpenAI's open source speech to text
Mhm.
application, right? If they re-encode these transformer processes as services that they can sell, they get to decide or to determine what is, the application of the transformer, right? They're trying to commoditize the transformer by making themselves the primary way we interface with it, right?
So instead of a new player entering the marketplace, getting hold of a little venture capital that's already been monopolized by these various uses, and just getting a hold of the original open source technology, they will kind of be forced into using the uh, branded version of it, the ChatGPT, the whatever,
Right, because, like, if they build an ecosystem of
because they'll have no choice.
well, if you build an ecosystem of tooling them, because, like, to work with a transformer by itself, right, is it's a technical application or just a technical algorithm, right? So to build a transformer from scratch, for example, it's hard, right? It's a special ability, a special set of knowledge you need in order to do that. And so what they're doing is they are lowering the cost to do that, but in doing so, they are diffusing a version of the technology that they have stamped and branded that force us to interact with it in ways that they approve, right? And that
They are doing the enclosing themselves
they
right
right, right.
now. Yeah,
So in some sense, this is not sinister. This is sort of what happens when technology diffuses as it matures. Certain types of affordances and implementations become standardized and normal, right? Like as technology gets more used, certain patterns of behavior of using technology become common,
right.
and so there is a natural sense of enclosure that happens. But on the other hand, right, you have this version of technology that can be another way that is still very nascent in its lifespan, right?
Mhm.
Transformers are barely a decade old. I think they're actually not even a decade old. But neural nets are a little older, obviously. But you know, they are kind of putting their thumb on the scale and saying, this is the way you should interact with transformers, right? Instead of having a general purpose, or sorry, instead of having a built for purpose algorithm for, speech to text or um, genomic research, our chatbot should be the thing doing all these things.
Doing all the things. It might be helpful here, push back on this if this doesn't work. Um, in terms of an example of an existing technology that started out kind of, general use, general application, like USB, cords and interfaces. Um, eventually somebody at Apple said, "Well, we'd like to kind of put our own fingerprint on this," and we got,
Right.
their version of we got lightning
Yeah.
cords. Um, and the evidence that they were maybe a little too late doing that in closing was that eventually regulators,
Yeah,
but also
EU
the
slapped them.
public were like, "No,
This
we're
is
not
so
doing that.
dumb.
Yeah, let's go back to just whatever the USB standard is, the industry will put it out and we can all the small producers, big producers, we can all just use it." And that improved, smoothed out the roads and it allowed it to be implemented more generally. So yeah, there are like always these urges and movements towards universalization and as opposed to enclosure. Is that fair enough?
No, that's right. Yeah, it's just in this case, obviously, we have a very interesting story of an incumbent who created the technology. Google incidentally financed the development of this architecture,
Right.
realized too late that it gave it away for free, and then is doing everything in its power to get it back, right? Right, becoming the main road that we had to take in order to interface with this technology.
It's not even putting the genie back in the bottle isn't even possible, but they're trying to get it back under their corporate imprimatur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the irony is, I think Google, this is sort of not this is not a financial podcast. I'm not trying to predict the future, but the irony here, I think, is insofar as I can tell, is that Google is going to win the quote unquote AI race because Google has, all the money from their previous ventures, right? And so they're going to watch the open AIs of the world, you know, burn themselves out trying to capture the value of this architecture, fail at doing so, and then buy up the little pieces that shatter, in order to build something else in the future, right? And so in that sense, Google wins by doing absolutely nothing. Um, I guess it's fortunate that they didn't actually try and commoditize it immediately, right? From their
There's
perspective, from our perspective, this is all a horrible hobby race. I don't think there's a humane version of the this particular version of what we're getting, right? I guess there is in a sense that if we scope chatbots to do things where we can measure their outputs, it can become a mundane technology, putting aside obviously the
a
intellectual
mundane
property.
being like an agnostic one that we can all get a hold of
Yeah, yeah,
and
and this
use
is
and
obviously
improve.
putting
Yeah.
aside. I understand the scraping of the internet,
Right.
the copyright concerns, right? I'm not trying to downplay that, but I'm saying there's a version of chatbots where it's like instead of talking to a general machine that doesn't know anything and just associates randomly from its corpus because it has dementia, you get like a RAG interface built for a specific task that we measure the efficacy of, right? Very boring, very mundane automation where people can actually measure if it works or not, right?
And
Instead,
that could be used by a small entering player, a small firm, as opposed to
right,
it has to be this massive
right,
corporation doing that
right.
the work and getting the reward.
We may have some version of this in the form of like these local AI models, these local large language models.
Yeah.
Because some people are able to deploy them on premise on their, still a little expensive, but some of these models are small enough they can run on, a laptop or a consumer PC. Unfortunately, because of the AI, or I should say the data center bubble, um, components are now scarce. But
Um,
assuming that changes,
Setting that aside, right? Yeah.
there is a version of what I'm saying that could be true. But what we have gotten up to this point is I call it in my blog, LLM intelligence is a dark pattern, right? So a dark pattern basically is a artifact of interface design. When someone designs a digital system or digital interface, they choose what you're interacting with, right? And so a good, interface designer will design things that are helpful, right? They will point you towards parts of the interface that will let you do what you want, right? So maybe using the color red. This is a small example. Using color red for choices that are kind of not affirmative, right? If you're trying to cancel something, the red button glowing red will tell you, this is a cancellation choice. You're putting in big bold letters it's a decision that's not revocable, right? Like
Right.
you're deleting your account. Are you sure you want to do that, right?
Green light go, red light
Right.
stop. It's a yeah. It's
So,
universal.
but with great power comes great responsibility. If you are the interface designer, you can also kind of obfuscate decisions and choices that users may want to take. Like, so, for example, if you are a subscription service and you want to keep people locked into your subscription, why don't you hide the subscription menu, right? And my blog post, I recount,
You bury that button so deep in the menu that nobody's ever
or
gonna
you don't
find it.
have one. So
Or you don't
in
have
my
one.
blog post, I recount the time the Economist magazine, so we had to subscribe as part of our curriculum at school to one of these major, news outlets. I chose the Economist, and
Yeah, no shade to them, but also
no,
this is
no,
something that they
huge
did,
shade
yeah.
to them because I'm saying there was no way to cancel on the website. You had to call a hotline in London, only open from the business hours, like I think like 10 a.m. to like 3 p.m. London time, Monday to Friday. I learned this on a Saturday. I was livid. I was so livid that this is like like and one way it's a dark pattern is you ask yourself, if I wanted to do the opposite, is it any easier, right? So can I subscribe to The Economist by just giving them my credit card online and paying them? Yes. Can I do the opposite easily? No. No. There's asymmetric action here, right?
Mhm.
Why? They designed the interface. They want you to stay, right?
And they want you to give up on the idea of canceling.
Right.
Yeah,
Or make it, they want it to be work, right? They understand marginal cost. So they are increasing the marginal
yeah.
cost.
Well, they're good businessmen, and therefore they're evil, UX designers, I
So
guess.
so with large language models, what we're getting is, so Grandpa Shelby is going to solve all our problems. They're presenting Grandpa Shelby as um, cool savant Shelby who is in his
Right.
prime,
They
right?
have rolled him out of
It's
the
like he
basement.
knows everything,
Yeah,
all the perfect associations of language, no mistakes, no errors, right? And in order to hide the fact that Grandpa Shelby is kind of like decrepit and kind of confused sometimes,
they
they're
just put cool sunglasses on him, like Weekend at Bernie's, like, "He's alive, we'll,"
well,
people like him.
they are only demoing him on a stage where all the edges are sanded off, and
Right.
like, right, all this architecture. I mean, sorry, all of this scaffolding, like the RAG stuff. Model context protocol is another one where basically you give a model instructions on how to use tools right behind the scenes, right? All these things to the end user is like, wow, the AI did X, Y, and Z, right? AI in quotes did X, Y, and Z. It must be smart. Behind the scenes, you've got armies of engineers who are kind of ensuring uh, uh um they literally are A/B testing all of these use cases, or some of the use cases that they
Mhm.
can. They are literally trying to scope out, if we do this and that, how it will behave, right? And on top of that, you've got armies of raiders in the third world who are kind of like, you know, they are as they've moved to a model of continuous retraining. So it's like the model, doesn't learn while you're interacting with it, but they do have raiders kind of do a tuning of basically basically they have raiders pick and choose responses that sound good, and that data does end up kind of affecting the way that the UI as well as the model performs long term, right? And like those changes are effectively you know uh, 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 they're creating a system in which the model is trained in ways that impress users who are so yeah, it's like a feedback loop basically. Users are impressed by the initial kind of response to the models. Models are then further trained on that kind of data to make them more like the ways users like to use them, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and the start of this, uh, vicious loop is, "Hey, Grandpa Shelby's cool, actually."
Right.
Right? That's the
Yeah,
beginning
yeah,
of it.
it's like, wow, Grandpa Shelly's cool. Oh, they like that. They like there's someone in the background. They like that. Really like that. They
Yeah.
like do more of that. Do more of that.
Right, right, right.
Right. And then,
Whatever people respond to,
right. Do more of that. Do more of
that's
that.
the incentive,
Right.
yeah.
And then build pieces of the stage that allow you to do more of that.
Yeah.
Right. And like, again, some of this is useful. A lot of it is wasteful. But it is in service of this vision of, again, going back to this techno-utopian, you know, uh, 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 you could call it delusion, whatever, right? Of a god in the machine, right?
The vision that Father Nikolai passed down to us from the turn of the century and brought forward.
So yeah, I mean, it's exactly that, right? So that is what makes this technology so frustrating to talk about, because it's like there's utility here. Very clearly, though, is nowhere near as much utility as they're being promised.
Mhm.
There are concerns and fears here, but the fears that we've been anchored, those of us who care about this technology and its
And
harms,
are concerned about it.
right,
Right.
and its harms, the fears that we're focusing on collectively are the sci-fi kind of doomer scenarios that the people in charge have fed us.
Right.
Right, Terminator, decimation, and to
Right.
be clear,
Mass firings.
job decimation is on the table, but not because the machine can do your job. It's because they wanted that to be true, and
And
they're conditioning you to bargain based on that premise, as you pointed out.
literally to collectively bargain under those auspices.
Right.
Like, make the worker and the worker class fearful, even if it won't come true in any form, because it has direct material impacts now on the political process, on the bargaining process. Well, as usual, we are coming dangerously close to predicting the future, which is probably a responsible place to curtail and wrap up this very excellent conversation. And so now that we come to this point, end the show. Mike, do you have any recommendations for, let's say, maybe optimistic, reassuring place people can look, an author they can read, a website they can just become more informed and become more empowered?
Yeah, so 2 recommendations come to mind. First one, I forget the authors. I wanna say that they are 2 computer scientists at Princeton. Name of the work is called AI as Normal Technology. Goes into some of the more technical parts of what we were talking about with the double movement, right? So they see AI when they say normal, they're not making a value judgment. They're saying, just as we've had these fights over other technologies, this fight over regulation and how to implement the technology, we're gonna have the same fights with AI. AI is not some autonomous monster god deity that will be self regulating by itself, right? They see it just like cars and electricity and all these other technologies.
It's not a unique phenomenon, it's a very regular one.
Right. And a lot of these fights we're having right now, like over the data centers and stuff, like they are normal fights to have over technology. Just as we're talking about.
Okay, what was the name of
AI is a normal technology. It's both a book and it's a website that has an article. So
that?
just put it into Google, or we're avoiding Google now because they're AI
Ask
monsters.
ChatGPT is all I'm saying.
The other recommendation is Cory Doctorow is working on a book, I believe it's called a the Reverse Centaur's Guide to AI, where he talks about, he's noted that, a lot of people who feel disempowered by AI are being made into reverse centaurs, which is basically when you're doing the work of a machine to make machine look better, right? We were talking about Grandpa Shelby earlier and people having to kind of sand the edges for him and do work to make him kind of more functional, kind of being a cog in the machine, as it were. The reverse of being a centaur is being able to have, a technology actually be additive to your potential, your output. And so when you are in control of that destiny, AI, specifically large language models, can be useful for, those types of things, right? So, Dr. O, I don't know if he talks about language models specifically, but he talks about AI more generally, and they are domains in which AI, both language models and non-language models, have helped people in an additive way. And his book, I think, is a guide to kind of find more ways of plugging that in so that the technology is less abusive to people.
Great, yeah. I always enjoy and informed by reading Cory Doctorow. And he can be found not on X, but Mastodon.
He just joined Blue Sky like a month or two ago, so
Just joined Blue Sky. Well, I love leaving it there, literally sending our audience off to a blue sky. And
I've been Mike.
and I've been Nick, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining us.
Mike here. Thank you so much for listening to The Last Enclosure. If you like this episode or you like the series, please like or share or leave a review or comment wherever you are listening or watching this podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, please reach out to us at contact@The Last Enclosure or visit our website listed in the show notes.